G'day guys, thanks for turning up for the December .NET user group. I've known Scotty for 15 years, so it's good to see you bring some life into the .NET community here, Scotty. I'll let you take it away.
Hey, give me the URL and I'll tweet it. Where are we going to? Yeah, sir. This one here? Can we stream it? What if we stream it while we're streaming it? Will that break something? Is that allowed to do that? Like, oh my God, it's happening now. It's going to like cause some kind of... So, oh hey, wow. This is us watching us watching us. So watch this. This is pretty awesome. Really, thank you to Adam, of course, for the streamers. This was required. I was like, I'm not coming unless there's paper streamers on my dais, and you know, only green M&Ms. All right, so let's tweet that, shall we? What's that? Oh, you have to translate that into English. I couldn't hear you. What did you say? How do you spell Australia? Is that right? And VS 2013. Live stream. It's all lies. Live stream. Yeah, that's the new thing. Is that good? That looks good. All right, cool. So we'll see. Well, that'll go viral soon. All right. That is so weird. Wow. All right, cool. Cool. I'm worried that the longer that I stay here, the more I'm going to develop an accent. I've been here 2 weeks. Adam, did you know about this? I've been here 2 weeks, and I was sitting with Andrew, and we were like, you know, I've got to call my wife. And I was like, oh crap, where is that coming from? Does that happen? Are there any Americans who've been here for a number of years and then they get the accent? Does anyone want to admit to that? Where are you at?
I'm a girl.
You're a girl? Are you the smallest one here? I can't see you. Hi, are you American?
Yes.
America. Hi. And have you?
For a year, so I talk a little bit Aussie.
Yeah?
Slightly.
Do you sound like sometimes you try to sound Aussie and you sound like you're a New Zealander and then they don't respect you? No. Yeah, because if you say no, it's going to be like 5 or 6 syllables.
Yeah, like
phone.
I can get Aussie there.
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
And
That's
then
brilliant.
I can throw in a y'all for fun, so.
Yeah, that is an interesting one, actually.
pretty
If you
good.
sit down and try to talk about computers like you're from that part of the South,
That's a good
it
silly
completely changes the way that people talk to you.
Exactly.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Billy Hollis. Billy Hollis from a different part of America. He's from Tennessee, and they talk like a Tyler Different kind of thing. Yeah, I'm working on my Australian though, so, and also as a German, I can talk a German a little bit. But okay, first we are going to look at the Azure. All right, so we have like 2 hours, and I've already wasted like 20 minutes of your time, which I feel really bad about. Let's talk about some of the cool stuff that's been going on in Azure right now, and then I'll talk a little bit about Visual Studio and some of the things that we're doing, and what else? And then maybe just some Q&A at the end. I think it'll be fun. So I work in Azure and Web Tools, and I've been having a lot of fun with Azure lately. And actually, I would encourage you guys to take a look at Friday.azure.com. Friday.azure.com. It's this new show that I've been doing. This is actually part of my job. Doing this and coming and hanging out with you is not necessarily part of my job. I'm not an evangelist, and I don't want to sell you anything. If you don't use Azure, I don't really care. It just means more Azure for me. And I don't work for DPE. I'm a PM in ASP.NET and Web Tools, but I did find out that I didn't like that the docs in Azure were not moving as fast as Azure was. The docs are catching up, but I wasn't learning it correctly, and it seemed like there were a lot of words you had to learn about storage and queues and blobs and all this kind of stuff. So the way I wanted to learn Azure was to find one of the men or women who built it and force them to sit down at a laptop with me and then teach me. So then I would record them teaching me. That seemed like it just seemed obvious to me, right? That was a great way to learn. But because I have access to those folks and you guys don't necessarily have access to them, I would then film it. And it's not polished. It's not polished in that kind of tech ed kind of a way. Because at tech ed, you know the demos are supposed to work, right? They've been setting it up for weeks. And tech ed is kind of artificial. Not to demean tech ed at all, but you know, you know how it ends. Someone drags a data grid from the Northwind database, and it drops, and they talk about how easy it is, and then they go, yay! And then they talk about how they stuck the landing and how wonderful they felt about their demos. What I'm trying to do with Azure Friday is just sit down with the actual developers. Some of them are good speakers, some of them are not good speakers, and we just talk. But we do it in a directed way. I'll say, teach me how to do Git deployment in Azure, and you have 10 minutes, and we'll do that. And I've got to talk to some really cool people. This guy here, Eric Gamma, if you've ever heard of Eric Gamma. You ever heard of the Gang of Four? So he's one of them. And I'm not sure, he may be Ringo, or I'm not sure. He's not John, but he's definitely one of the Gang of Four. And he sits down and he shows me Monaco, which is the new editor that's written in TypeScript, and he just explains it. And once he realizes that it's not marketing, the attitude changes. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, hey, I'm going to turn the camera on. Well, what is this for exactly? Well, that's just a little thing I'm doing, right? And then they open up and they show you some pretty cool stuff. So it's a podcast. It's up on iTunes. You can go and hit subscribe. You can add it to your calendar. And I actually thought about Australia when I did it, because even though it's called Azure Friday, it goes live Thursday night, right? When it's Friday here. Okay, it's nice. See, now it's a thing. All right, so, and I also have a live chat. So I go into Jabber, which is our live chat room, and then I try to have the people who are on with me be available over the course of the day, and it's kind of like a nice live chat. So that is actually part of my job, this particular site. So check it out, please. It's lovely, if I may say so myself. And it's at friday.azure.com. So who is using Azure or playing with it or has found it to be useful? Okay. Okay, who is offended by its existence and are really just here for the pizza and the beer? No? Any Amazon people or other clouds? AWS, Rackspace, other clouds? Okay. One of the things that I learned first in Azure was that there's this idea of storage. And I thought that storage was just for putting blobs in, and I just figured, okay, there's Azure Storage, and I forgot about it. But I started to realize how Azure was layered is in a really logical way. I can take a VHD, like a virtual hard drive, right, and I can just stick it in Azure and it'll sit there. Or any opaque bunch of binary bits and stick it there, or a graphic or a JPEG and put it there. And then it can be made, if I choose, public and accessible via HTTP. But ultimately, though, I didn't realize that if I have like a virtual hard drive and I put it in Azure Storage, it's accessible to other things within my Azure account, so I could like upload a disk, open up a virtual machine, and then attach that disk to that virtual machine and then look at it. Isn't that weird? I mean, I could literally just go File New, VHD, mount it, because in Windows 7 and 8 you can just mount VHDs, drop some files in it, upload it to Azure, open a VM, attach it, and then there's the file. And that seems obvious after you've heard it. But until you've heard it, you're like, okay, and then that sits on top of that. So then it makes me realize that in Azure, the virtual machines that I would create actually never have a disk underneath them. What they have is a mapped drive to a virtual disk that's sitting in my storage somewhere. And because storage is replicated 3 times, you're never going to lose that stuff. Even if you delete your virtual machine, the disk is still going to be around. So I could delete a disk and delete a virtual machine rather and leave the disks around. So that was super interesting. So my first foray into using Azure Storage was I've got my podcast site, Hanselman, and this is just a 2-page site. Okay, and if you haven't seen this show, I encourage you to check it out. It's kind of like Science Friday. It's an interview show. And I went to archives, and I put in pictures of everyone that I interview. You know, it's a diverse crowd of people, and I talk to all sorts of different people from all different walks of life. But then I got a bill. I got a $50 bill at the end of the month. And I was like, well, this sucks. I just moved this off of this hoster to put into Azure, and now it costs me money. What's going on? It's important that even though I work on the team, that I use my own personal email address. I don't get free Azure time because I work at Microsoft. Because if I did, that would be like someone, like if you ever bought like a car, and you know the people who work for the car dealer, they get to drive the cars. They're like a different car every day. And they talk, oh, it's great to have a Lexus. But they really can't afford a Lexus because they work at a car dealership. You know what I mean? So they're telling you how great it is to own the pride of ownership of a Mercedes or a Lexus, but they've never actually done it. And they have all the gas and all the oil changes are free, so they don't really know what's going on. I pay the actual bill. And you'll notice right now that I'm actually got a little warning here, like a cell phone that says 2 days until you expire and it's going to cost you money. That's one of the big fears of Azure, is that you're going to sign up, it's great, it seems wonderful, and then Microsoft's going to stick it to you, and you're going to wake up the next morning and owe $1,000, right? That's not going to happen. In fact, there's a little warning down here that's actually cool. It's actually popping up and saying that you're about to run out, and it's going to cost you on average, from looking at how you run your things, about, in this case, $10 a day. And then I could go and see what's running and shut those things down. So there's no surprise. I'm not going to wake up with a bill tomorrow. If I've got 2 days left, it might cost me $20. So that was cool. But I woke up one day and it was super expensive and I was freaking out. And it turned out that these are 400 images on one page. So the page weight here is almost 9 megabytes. So, duh. Every time one of you guys visits here, it costs 9 megs. So then it was like 10, terabytes of outgoing data, and that was bad, and I was an idiot for it. So I started to think about how I'm going to do penny pinching in the cloud. And actually, if you go and Google with Bing for penny pinching, penny pinching in the cloud, I've got a whole series of articles on penny pinching, where I try to save as much money as I possibly can on Azure. So the first one was to figure out how to not charge me money here. So what I did is I went into the source here, and I thought about how these were loading. And I believe, if I can find this bit of code here, scroll, 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 I did this. I did 2 things. There we go. I hooked up a thing called jQuery lazy loading, where I only load the image as it enters the viewport, right? Again, these are those things that seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how few people actually do this. So now if I scroll, see it turns gray, and then they load. That's because they entered the viewport and then we load them, and that made a huge difference. That made a huge difference. And I had to go and do a little bit of work to make that nice, but it was pretty straightforward. But then the Australians, darn Australians, said that the site was too slow. I was trying to figure out why this is a problem. Even though I made it faster, it was still slow. And it turns out that those images were still coming from Chicago, right? Obvious. CDN. So I put them on the CDN. Well, turning on the CDN was really, really easy. I just made a Hanselman CDN, and then I have a container full of images here. And I throw those images in with a thing called Cloud Explorer and drag and drop them in here. And these are all the pictures. And then I turn on the CDN, and now they're everywhere. And I guess they come from Sydney somewhere, so they're really fast. And it turns out they look like they're coming from Hanselman CDN, blob, whatever. And that, I might not want to always use Azure. I might want to use S3 someday. So what I did is I configured these to come from images.hanselminutes.com. So it's classier. I think that's classier if you use a CNAME like that. Plus, it means I own the URL, right? And this is a small thing, but it made me happy. No one else is going to notice when they right-click and look at it in the source that it comes from blob this or that. But it took like 5 minutes to set that up, to have the CNAME. So I started figuring these things out, and then how to use storage, and then started slowly moving a couple of VMs over to Azure. The first one I did was a PHP one. This is a Linux VM, and this is a Windows VM that's running MySQL. And these are tiny. These are tiny virtual machines. By tiny, I mean that they just really don't do much. They're actually only using 768 megs of RAM, and they're actually on a shared core, because they're just kind of relaxing. So they only cost me a couple of bucks. I think it's like $15 a month. And I think, okay, this is actually, I forgot about this. I actually left this one still running. This is me SSH'd or shushed into the Linux machine. You can see it's working pretty hard. And that's my PHP one. And then this one here is the Windows Server 2008 one. So I've remoted into it from here. And that's working very nicely. This provides the MySQL. And I don't know much about MySQL, but I do know that this thing is not really, this is not a really fast computer. And I can move around it, and you can see me doing stuff, and it works fine, and it runs MySQL Workbench. But like right there, see that pause? There's some slowness to it. So I was trying to figure out why that was happening. And it turned out that there's a thing called IOPS. Does you know about this, right? Number of input operations, output operations per second. And the standard in the cloud is about 500. This is common on Amazon as well. You say, I get 500 IOPS a second. And they can manage that because there's no real disk, right? They're mounted to some network backplane that then talks to the VHD, and they can throttle how fast you talk to the disk. And I wanted to get more IOPS. On some clouds, you can say, I want to upgrade to SSD, and you can pay more money. But it turns out that for free, I talked to the guy, and this is part of the Azure Friday thing, I talked to the guy who works on this, Corey Sanders. You actually can have multiple disks, and it doesn't cost anything extra. And the size of the VM you have depends on the number of disks that you can have. So if you have a small, you get 2 disks. If you have a medium, you get 4 and 8 and up to 16. And each disk gets 500 IOPS. And again, I mean, you're nodding. Either you're nodding because you totally know this and you're bored, and that's okay. But you're nodding because, of course, it makes sense. And this is the thing, right? It makes sense. So the data disk now has a different caching mode, because I don't want to mess up the database with some caching. The OS disk is read-write. They each get 500. I move the MySQL over, and then suddenly the OS stuff is still a little bit slow, but the SQL database is like boom, 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 which is awesome. So when I made the disk, though, I go in here and I say attach empty disk. There's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it like this, or you can make the disk locally and upload it. Okay? So I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna be cheap. I don't want to cost a lot of money. I'll say 5 gigs, because no one would ever use that much space. It's immense. So immediately, of course, I use 5 gigs. And I asked them if I can resize this VHD, and they're like, well, that's kind of hard, right? Because you're inside the system. You have to get outside and get the VHD, bring it down, resize it, mess with it, bring it back up. So I talked to Corey, and I said, well, I wanted to make this giant, but I didn't want to pay for it. And he says, you should have made it $999 to start with. And I was like, well, why? And he's like, well, you're only actually paying for how much is in it. It's sparse storage. So I was like, dude, remember these little things? That's where you put stuff like that. Like, why don't you have like something in text here that says, just go ahead and put a terabyte? Just, because the problem is people won't do it. Even if we say, put a terabyte there, people will still think it's Microsoft trying to charge you money. But he says, make all disks $999, because they're only ever going to get charged for how much is in them. And I told him he really needs to add one of these dealies, because that would make that's totally valuable information. You only get charged for the disk space that you use. So that was super interesting. And then I found out that when you do that, you can just go into now I'm switched over to the cloud here, okay? And I can right-click on the computer and go Manage. And if I added an empty VHD, it would just show up in Disk Management, and I just add it like any other disk. And when I started thinking about it like that, I realized that I had a lot more kind of control than I wanted. You see what I'm saying? Like, I was like, wow, that's the disk right there. Neurons started connecting in my brain, and I was like, okay, well, I could put caching there and images. There could be an easy way to upload data files. I mean, you can do tricks with bandwidth, like, where's Troy? Troy Hunt? So Troy wanted to upload 153 million records into an Azure thing so that he could process it for, was it haveibeenpwned.com? And what I thought was so clever, he's like, well, I could write these command line applications and then do the inserts from Australia to the west of the US off of this 9 gig file. Or I could just take that 9 gig file, upload it into a VHD, remote into the VHD, so then he only pays for that bandwidth of the raw file, or zipped up, it's probably 1.5 gigs, and then do all of the communication from one VHD to another VHD in the same data center, and then that's all free. The communication between the data center inside the data is totally free. So what did you say, like $9? But it was brilliant. You should read his posts at troyhunt.com. They're absolutely brilliant, because it's not like he's saving big money, okay? He's saying, oh, I saved $12 here, I saved $9 there. But then when he adds it all up versus using SQL Server, if he runs this thing, it could have cost him thousands of dollars in a year. And this isn't a matter of learning Azure. It's partially Azure, but it's also just kind of good computer science. Like, here's some constraints. Ingress is free. So, for example, uploading the stuff didn't cost him anything except for the bandwidth out of Oz. because going into there is free. You know, it's all the external, it's the outgoing bandwidth that costs money. So there's some constraints that you have to work in, and he's like, oh, I'm going to save money. I'm going to sneak this in, fire up a VM, fires up a giant SQL server, does a bunch of processing, and then shuts it off when he's done with it. And that's kind of the promise of the cloud, and that has been kind of the beginning of getting my head around kind of what things I can do and the damage that I can do in Azure, which is making me happy. You know what I mean? I talk about this a little bit in the keynote tomorrow, but I'll tell you guys as well, this idea of, there were these kids they were interns at New York Times, and they were doing AWS. And they had a bunch of TIFF files that were scans of all of the copies of the New York Times going back like 140 years or something like that. And the boss says, can you put all of these into a PDF and then resize them and OCR them and do all this work? And it's like 4 or 5 terabytes of data. It was going to take them forever. And it's not the kind of thing you do on a laptop. But you could write the code to do one of them on a laptop. And then you want to take that and then put it in the cloud and do it n times. So the boss gives them a credit card, and they spend $300 over the weekend. They fire up a bunch of virtual machines. They do the work, and then they shut all the VMs down. And I'm an old timer. Back in the day, we would go and we'd buy the machines from PC Micro Center, and we'd build them all up, and we'd put the memory slots in ourselves. From the boss's perspective, it happened automatically because we were the cloud for the boss, right? The boss says on Friday, get that done. And the cloud does the work over the weekend while the boss is golfing or whatever. And then Monday morning, the problem is solved. So I told that story for a little while, and a guy comes up to me and he says he knew those kids at the New York Times, and in fact, it cost them $150, except the first run they screwed up and they had to do it twice. And that's why it cost $300. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's the cloud, So when you can go compute in virtual machine and say from gallery, you've probably seen this if you play with Azure at all, and that's cool. You can go in here and pick your different stuff. And there's Ubuntu, and you can pick that, and that's lovely. But there's also your own images. So I made my own. This was super easy. I made a new Ubuntu image, got it exactly the way I wanted it, set it all up, put everything just as I wanted, and then said capture. So now I can file new one of these. And this is another great way to save money. That these aren't really charged for anything. They're just sitting there in storage, and they're not running or anything. So you can go and make these for your build servers or those things that you do kind of rarely. If you have a build server, maybe that you only need a couple of times. Or an old client VM, you need a certain way. Set it up, store it away, and then rather than starting and stopping a VM, you actually create or delete a VM and save money. But this dialog, even though it's been recently redesigned, and it's kind of cool because there's an MSDN section down here in the corner here, where you can get to copies of Visual Studio, which is kind of cool. So if you want to try Visual Studio, you just fire one up and give it a try. There's a pile of stuff that's not actually in there, and it's kind of stupid. They've hidden it. The team that owns that, file new from gallery, is different from the team that owns the images tab here. And they have this thing. Now is it depot or depot here? Depot. See, now I don't know. You guys have so many words that if I either say it right or it's a swear. And I don't know. It's the gallery of virtual machines. So if you click this button that is in the totally obvious images folder here, and I'm working with those guys to get that moved out, check out what happens. This is awesome. So this is actually from Microsoft Open Technologies. They're a different company. Some people haven't actually heard about these folks. Microsoft's been able to do a lot of open source lately, and the way that we've been able to do it is we made a whole other company called Microsoft Open Tech, and then they can handle all the patents and all the complicated open source stuff. So then they own these things, and they own these projects, and they own our relationship with Linux, and they do ASP.NET and all that kind of stuff, and then we just contract for them. So check all this out. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of community created. So like, let's say I want something with Redis. Let me see here. There we go. Security hardened Redis on Ubuntu long-term 12.04. It's just sitting there ready to go, right? You can actually go and see this up at this OpenTech website. Just go search for VM Depot and pick one of them. Like here's the Azure Data Science Core HPC Linux with SciPy and everything pre-configured and ready to go. So you click on that. And then you say deployment script, and you don't read this, and you hit agree, and then pick that little chunk of code right there. And I'm just going to paste that here, and we'll take a look at it. It's 2 lines of code. Now I'm going to look at this one. But what we really want to do is look at it like this. Let's go out to the... okay, this is my shush from earlier. I'm going to shut that down. Okay, so here is the command line on the right here. And I'm going to say Azure. And that's the cross-platform command line. I prefer it to the PowerShell one. There's 15 different ways to talk to Azure. You can do it with .NET, you can do it with Ruby, you can do it with Java, you can do it in PowerShell, you can do it in Visual Studio. This is easiest, in my opinion. You type Azure, and it is a node application, and actually you get some cool ASCII art, right? Which means that we're serious. What's that? What's that? Yeah, you're welcome, exactly. Yeah, and if you do this on your BBS with FidoNet, it's even better. Yeah, you should really give it a try. It's awesome. Yeah, we'll catch up. When Microsoft sees your brake lights, you're in trouble. So I type Azure VM list, and it's going to go and make a JSON call out to this web service. And the web service is the same web service that everything talks to in Azure. So when I go and say, give me a list of VMs, it talks to this back-end RESTful service. When I type Azure VM list here, it does the same. The general structure is Azure, noun, and then verb. So Azure site list, Azure VM list, Azure storage list, Azure VM shutdown. You know this, I've just taught you how to use this command line. It's like it's that easy. So I could go and say Azure VM create super fancy pants 2, I don't know, whatever. And then this line here is the ID of the thing that's in the VM depot. So what is that? What is the VM depot? It is a storage account. That's all it is. It's someone else's storage account that they gave magic powers to, that they upload these VHDs to, right? So then I go like that, and then I say that I want the location to be East Asia, and then Scott, and then a password that no one will ever remember. I don't know, like there. That's it. There you go. That looks secure. And then I say SSH. And then that's going to go and look up the image in storage, someone else's storage, right? Then copy that image from their storage into my storage. And then boot that image up. See, now it's getting the storage accounts, finding out where that is, copying them, and then it's going to fire that up. And then in a little bit, we'll have a whatever this is, Azure Data Science Core. And I don't have a PhD, but if I did, I would use it a lot. And then check this out, this idea of endpoints. You see how before, when I was remoted into those virtual machines, the ones that I use all the time, like Hanselman, Sendy. This is a Linux VM, the one I was using HTOP on. It's got these endpoints. These things are locked down by default, but we've gone and we've taken the SSH, or I like to say shush. You shush your way into the machine. Shush usually runs on port 22, right? That's the private port. I'm exposing it on a different port, a port of my decision. So that's doing that mapping from external to internal. On the public side, I'm mapping 80 to 80, so I can get that going. And if I wanted to add additional ports, I can just go and add them, and I could also load balance them. So if I had multiple Linux VMs, I could fire those up. Here, I'm programmatically doing that. I'm going and saying make a endpoint, and I think we called it super fancy pants 3. And I would go and say, all right, map 80 to 80 and 80, 80 to 80, and whatever ports you need to open up or close down, you can do directly from here. And what that's allowed me to do then is I can go and say Hanselman Linux Farm, and I think that everyone should blog just so they can go and Google their brains later. It's amazing how many people don't know how to find stuff that they did before. Anytime you do something awesome, blog about it, and then you'll find it. It's that easy. That's how you do it. And then do it for 10 years, and then you'll be a successful blogger. That's how it works. You blog in obscurity for 9 of those years, though. And actually, it's really lonely, though, when you Google for a problem, and then you're the answer. You're like, okay. Or even worse, if you find yourself asking the question, then you know you're alone. Like, there are a few things that are that alone-making. So within this page, This is me explaining how to do all this stuff, blah, 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 scroll, scroll, scroll. You can then set up what's called an availability set. And this was confusing to me because it's not a good name for it, but I don't know how to do it. When you make a bunch of virtual machines like this and you put them together in a farm, they're family now, right? They're load balanced, and you're going to go and have these things all talk together. But like any good family, you want them to be as far apart from each other as possible in order to stay healthy. Because if these guys were actually on the same rack, and that rack died, then your farm dies. So you put them in an availability set, and the availability set is just a name that they share. I call it Hanselman Linux. They could have been said, could have been foo or bar. It doesn't matter as long as they're all the same. And if they're all the same, it will make sure that they're in separate parts of the Azure data center, so that if something goes wrong on that rack, on that node, on that storage container, or half the data center goes down, they're going to be kept available. Isn't that cool? Do you like that, Adam? Keep family apart. That's the message. It's kind of a bad message, actually. And what I ended up being able to do then was, and again, you could do this in PowerShell, but I kind of like the DOS one, the cross-platform one, because that's the code to make a 5-node Linux load-balanced web farm in basically 5 lines, 10 if you count the fact that I have to say open the endpoints 5 times. It makes sense? You make the first one, and you give it a name for the image, and then the other ones you connect all together, and then that's it. And it's really awesome. But after learning all of this stuff, I've realized that maintaining VMs sucks. It's no fun, and they're very needy. They always want something. They're like a puppy. And I love that. I know you Australians like their pets, don't they? I do not like pets. I mean, like, I know it's bad to say that in public, that, oh, you're not a dog person? I mean, you must be a cat person. No, I'm not an animal person. I like them with breaded, you know, and with a little spice. Like an MLT with a mutton that's just so lean, it's just, so perky. I don't like maintaining things I have to keep alive, and I would just hate to not water a dog or whatever it has to do to keep the dog alive. You come back and you forgot to water the dog. These virtual machines need maintenance. They're always asking for Windows Update or apt-get upgrade or something, and I'm never sure if that's going to break it. It's just a hassle. I don't like it. I RDP into the Windows one, and it always wants to restart for some reason, and I'll be typing on it, and like, you know how when you're like your hand's coming down to hit enter, and it's always at that moment when the restart thing pops up, and then time slows down like the Matrix, you know what I mean? And think like, no, and then you know restart's the default, right? And you're like, and you can't stop your hand because gravity, you know. So then what do? Do you know how to stop? The only thing that can stop Windows from restarting? So this gentleman says shut down -A. Turns out I have a faster way. You want to know what that is? What you do is you just keep a copy of Notepad open like this, and then when the system tries to shut down, Notepad will pop that up. And only Notepad has the power to prevent, because it will bring Windows itself to its knees with like a not responding. Isn't that cool? Yeah, I'm glad that you like that. So I renamed notepad.exe to n.exe, and it saves me many oatpads every day. So I just say n, boom, and then I save Windows. Yeah. And then once the not responding curtain of patience comes upon it, then you can cancel out, and you've stopped everything, and you save the world. It's actually cool. Speaking of not responding, did you see my my Halloween costume this year? I went as Microsoft Outlook. I basically set up a curtain, like a kind of an opaque curtain, and just held it in front of myself with like a thing, and it just said not responding. And I would walk around and just refuse to speak to anyone. That was really the essence of Outlook in my mind. So these VMs, though, you own them. You own them like you own a home. You have to maintain them like you maintain a home, and that's fine, but that's infrastructure as a service. I've decided that I prefer websites, because websites are like a hotel room that you can trash every night and then come back the next day and its bed's been made. You know what I mean? And then you can get into this, like, what can I do to this hotel room? Like, you know, that will still make it here in the morning, you know? I don't know if anyone heard that I burned down the hotel in Brisbane. Did anyone hear about that? You heard that? Yeah. True story. I didn't actually burn the hotel down, but there was a fire in the hotel, in Brisbane, and we were all up at 3 in the morning, and I came down, and all the speakers were around there, and they were just like, what did you do? Were you overclocking your laptop again? I was in 617, the fire was in 614, and it was like a fan or whatever, it was an electrical fire. And I was like gonna sleep through it. I was determined to sleep through it, because it's never a fire. It's always a lie. So I slept through it, and then the guy is like talking, you need to leave, you need to leave. And then he started pounding on my door. Dude, seriously, you need to get out. And there was a tone of voice when he said, dude, seriously, that was enough to get me out. So I'm like, come on. And like, so I was all ready, sitting there in my underwear, like, God damn, what do you want? And I open the door, and the smoke comes out. Oh my God. As soon as you open the door and you see the smoke, everything changes immediately. And I'm like, all right, get my insulin, get my passport, and okay, which laptop do I like the best? You know what I mean? So I was sitting there with like the Ultrabook and the Mac, and I'm like, this is kind of heavy. And he's like, dude, we gotta go. So I left the Mac, and I ran off with my Ultrabook and my insulin, and that was good. So I was sitting there in my all-together, and I was like, okay, well, I got my insulin and my passport and my laptop. I forgot my 4G spot, right? So I don't have my 4G hotspot from Telstra, so then I'm screwed, right? Because the bandwidth here is too much. But still, I would have survived. It would have been great. I would have been homeless, but I would have had my laptop, and that would have been okay. So virtual machines are like that, is what I'm saying. Websites let you trash the hotel room, and these are great because websites don't have you even think about the virtual machine. You never have to worry about maintaining them. You don't even know if they're running Linux or Windows. They are all actually running Windows. All of Azure is, in fact, which is funny when you tell people that you can run Linux on Azure, and they're like, why is that allowed? Like, do they know that you can do that? Did someone tell Ballmer that you can do that? And I tell clients, as we went and visited a client today, and they were like, why do you allow Azure on Linux on Azure? And I was like, because what do you think it's running on? It's running on Windows, so we win, yay! Right? That's what Microsoft wants you to buy. They want you to buy Windows, and they want you to buy Office. And once you've bought that, everything else is free. Right? And that's why Azure is the way it is. We want you to use as much as you want and run whatever makes you happy, and you're running it on Windows, and that's great. But it should just work, though, right? So these websites here are effectively hotel rooms that you rent. They all run on Windows, but the virtual machine is managed for you, completely managed. You don't have to do anything. It automatically handles rolling updates. You can have multiple ones.
What I do want to do is tell you about a brand new initiative that SSW has done. So I'll play a quick video so you've seen it.
I've been running SSW for 20 years. I've also been a lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney for many years, and I think the gap is getting wider between what they're being taught and what employers need for the guys to hit the ground running and be able to do real work.
It is a new initiative. We've been training around the country for, I don't know, 15 years or so. This is done very differently. It's not the lecture style we're typically used to. It's got 3 main groups of people that have been applying. It's the typical experienced developer who has got behind the 8 ball. They're not used to doing things with ISC containers and dependency injection, and they don't do Scrum at their company. They're quite behind. Then there's a young .NET developer who we think will be the major market, and that is the person that's just finished university. They know a lot of theory, but they haven't actually gone and done it. They're going to get stuck. They're going to Google. They're going to go down another rabbit warren, but this way, all those blockages, they won't be blocked. They're going to have a couple of senior software architects with them all the time. Adam Stevenson, you might know, who ran that MBC course around Australia that was sold out and really loved. Then there's the other one. The main sign-ups has come from the development manager, not him himself, but he's got a team of guys and he's recruited people and he's sending them here before they join his team. You can find someone who's okay at UI, but they don't understand, they're no good at coding, like .NET coding, the middle tier. Or you can find someone who's okay at the middle tier, but is not familiar with Bootstrap and a whole lot of UI technology. So it's hard to find that blended guy. And even if you do find one of those, they're not used to doing things in a Scrum manner, and they don't know the TFS, ALM lifecycle, you know, all that type of stuff. The employers that come to see the presentations at the end of the 9 weeks, they're going to see what has been developed for the 9 weeks. They're going to see what the guy's like. And that's a bloody lot better than just reading resumes. They're going to see a whole lot of people, they're going to fill in a form, and then they're going to basically put forward an offer to some of those guys.
I was actually just talking to a customer earlier today who has multiple virtual machines. They're in a business that has nothing to do with IT. Like, let's say they sell insurance. And they're like, well, when we do rolling updates, we have to pull the VM out of the load balancer and all the stuff that we've been told for 15 years. Drain all of the connections off of that one thing and do rolling. All that stuff, all that administrivia, Websites handles for you. It's just handled. And that's why I like that. So what I can do here is I'll just get out of this world and I'll go back into the world I'm comfortable in, which is the command line. And I'm just going to take this website here, okay? And I'm going to go and I'm going to say Azure site create Adam Kogan is dreamy. Locate, I don't know if that's too long, West US, and then say -- get in this folder here, okay? Hopefully no one has made this before. It's very likely that I may have to be Adam Kogan is dreamy 2. I have reserved that. I'm going to keep that forever now. And it made that website. It calls get init. Then it says remote repository. And it adds get remote add. So it's calling this for me now, okay? So I've just done that. And I look at the website and it doesn't look any different. Nothing exciting has happened. And I'll go back over into the portal and we'll see if Adam is here. There you are. Okay. So here's you. And if I visit you, I don't know what you'll show me. Probably nothing. You're successfully created, Adam. So congratulations. Okay. And then I can go and say get add dot, and then I can complain about how the IBM Selectric typewriter still haunts us even today with the carriage return LF. And then I can say get commit, I don't know, something, and then get push Azure master password for Adam. If I go here to deployments on Adam, it says deploying right there. So we're pushing this information. Now it says remote. See if it says remote right there? And then this is going to then finish it, and now we have an active deployment. Now I could go and visit the website again, but real awesome people do it from the command line, because it's just, that's where I do everything. So I'll just say browse. And then, because you could have dozens of these. In all seriousness, you could have lots and you can't remember what the name of the thing is. It could be a GUID, right? You don't know. So here is the hello world. And what I ended up doing was I made a classic ASP, ASP.NET, Razor, Node, and PHP just because I could. All in the exact same website. All at the same time, all running on Azure. Classic ASP was a little obnoxious, but it works. And that's sitting on top of Azure, but that's fine. You know, yay, big deal. Heroku's been doing that for years. I can also go and say Azure Site Scale Instances 3, and then it'll go and say, well, what site? It's doing the site that it's in right now. I didn't have to tell it the name of the site. It goes and makes a server farm, sets up the load balancing, and now I've got that website running in 3 places, which is yummy. I can go over here to scale. And I can say, well, I want to make the scale actually scheduled. I want to do it maybe by metric. I could have auto scale. So I want to have as few as 1 instance or as many as 5. And then, but only when the target CPU exceeds a certain range. And then it will automatically scale up and scale down. And then it'll warn me if that's going to cost or if it's going to save me money. So in this case right now, think about what it just said. I didn't actually plan this, but it's lucky that it's saying that. Why could autoscale save me 66%? How many websites did how many instances did I just make? 3. So what do you think the 66% is? The 2 that I don't need. And why do you think it's saying that? Because they're not doing anything. Right? Those instances are doing exactly nothing. So that's really cool information. I've never even seen that before. So that's kind of hot. And then, of course, I could go and delete Atom if I wanted to. Now, I'm going to go to Configure. And from here, I can go and set up like what version of PHP. We just added 5.5 recently. I can turn on classic mode, integrated mode, all that kind of stuff. Turn WebSockets on. It all works just fine. Again, never having to think about the underlying operating system. But check this out. I can go and click on Edit in Visual Studio Online. And it's going to go and update the config for this site. And then I can hit Dashboard. And then over here where it says Delete Git Repository, this link appears. Then I can go there. And notice the URL is different. See the SCM there? So this is kind of Visual Studio Lite in the browser. And I've got IntelliSense. If I go I dot, it knows that Scott is a string. But if I make Scott number, it knows it's a number. Why do you think that is? It's because it's written in JavaScript. We know everything, right? We're in the browser, so why not? This is actually 200,000 lines of TypeScript. This is the stuff that Eric Gamma was showing. It also loads with AMD, so it has modules. So if I go and hit PHP, if I understand correctly, it'll be black for a second and then turn color. That's it. His internet connection here is too fast. When I do it on my 4G, you basically see the module load. So it's bringing in the AST, the abstract syntax tree, and the parsing, and it's all happening right there. Now I get it for Razor, HTML. There's just a flash. You can't see it, but there's just a flash as it loads that PHP. But sadly, classic ASP remains like kind of lame. Yeah, it's a bummer. I can also do a split editor. I can go and select items for compare. Isn't that cool? Who said awesome? This is spontaneous utterance. That's kind of cool. I had someone actually like, oh my God, like, you know we can hear you saying that. Like, are you okay? But these are the kind of thing. This is what I like about Azure and what I'm enjoying about the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years is that all of this is like, yeah, I get that. Like, that makes sense. Yeah, you should be able to do that, right? This is a little bit like Cloud9, if you use the Cloud9 editor or Code Run. They're real kind of similar. Other things that I can do, though, is I can go and open up a console. And now I'm running DIR in the cloud itself. So now I'm on a shell up in Azure on that machine. And I can go and run Git and the kind of stuff, or Grunt, or the different things that I might want to potentially set up. I could also go in here and then set up Git, and then set up a Git repository for this development stuff. Yay. Commit that. And then I've got a little development world. Now, this doesn't mean you're editing production, right? You're editing in a Git repository on a machine in the cloud. You would then update it and then push it up to whatever. You wouldn't actually go and use this for evil. I would hope not. But you've got all the little niceties that one would imagine. I can hit Control comma. Oh, that was, did the power go out? No, that was me. Are you okay? You just reminding us that you're there, or what are you doing? We good? No, you're the boss, man. You're the boss. So I just hit Control comma, and then I can go and find sites and get right to them there. And when you do that, there's a whole bunch of editor commands and go-to symbol. This is not just running around in a text editor. I've got really cool functionality that like move line up and down with Alt up and down. It's a pretty fully featured text editor. And that's all built in, and that's free, and that's fun. One other thing that I could do, though, that is slightly different that you can do today, is if I go over to deployments, and this is kind of a hack, but it's going to be more official soon. I'm going to take the URL for the Git stuff, okay? And I'm going to throw it up here, and I'm going to remove my name. That's the SCM. Remember how the website's here, but Adam's there. And I'm going to then remove the Git stuff. And then it's going to pop up this. And this is Kudu. Kudu is the code name for the Git deployment thing that I just showed, where you take something in Git and you deploy it to IIS. And this is open source. So if you want to use this at your company and you don't have Azure and you have no interest in using Azure, but you do have IIS, and you maybe like to deploy from Git, you can have this. You can run it. It's open source. You can pull request it. You can fix it. You can play with it. You can modify it. And that's cool. Like that? Okay. There's this diagnostics console that's kind of cool. This is not as fancy as what we saw before, but I can move around. You know how it's actually changing the directory down here? Those are the real files on the disk. And this is getting back to the whole storage thing. There's some storage blob out there that represents some virtual machine that this is abstracted away from me here, but it's a real, there are real files on a real C drive somewhere. And if I want to edit something in my deployment, maybe to debug or find out what's really going on, I can even drag and drop files in here. If I wanted to see the log files for this application, I can actually poke around in here. If I turn those logs on, I can see the log files for the Git deployment and traces. Drag and drop a file in if it's missing to get it working. But I can also, I've got effectively an HTML5 remote PowerShell down here, which is kind of creepy. And I could do something stupid like run Notepad. So now I've completely locked up the diagnostics console. Right? I mean, I'm pretty much stuck. But have I successfully hacked Azure, maybe? Let's find out. Well, turns out no, of course, because we're running everything in a sandbox, and in a little while it'll bring up another instance, and that Notepad will go away. But I was having a really interesting conversation with a client a couple days ago who wanted to know how they could remote into their machine. And I was describing how they could turn on SSH on a Linux machine, or remote PowerShell on a Windows machine. And then the security guy was kind of in the back like a bouncer at a bar. And he was just like, there's no way that is ever going to happen. You're an idiot. And he was just thinking that, but I could tell that's what he was thinking. And basically the point was security guy's never going to go for that, but the guy's got a valid reason to do that. He thinks he wants a command line. But what we did is we had hashed it out, and what he really wanted is he needs a list of processes, find out what's running, what's not, what the versions are, maybe get a memory dump. There's stuff that he wants about the machine, but he believes that he needs a remote console. This is a real common customer problem. Someone comes to you and says, this cell phone sucks, I need a bigger antenna. And then you talk to the customer and you realize what they really want is better reception. Then you give them a cell phone or something like that, and then, oh, okay, well, I guess I didn't need a better antenna at all. But if you just turn around and hand them the better antenna, they're just going to come back later and want something. So you dig into the business problem, and I call that the I need a better antenna problem. So some of the things that you can do, and I think people should do these themselves, is why not put a REST API on top of the management infrastructure for what you want to do? So why not make it so I could go and say to my Azure website, diagnostics/processes, and here are the processes. There's node, there's command, and there's Notepad floating around in space there. Isn't that freaky? And it's RESTful, so that's the process ID right there. So why not actually visit it? And let's look at the Notepad process. Oh, so it looks like it's gone away. So Notepad has been evicted. Yep, it's gone now. That was Azure tidying up, right? This has no business to be there. But I'm going to be awesome and put it back. I don't know how many times I'm going to get, like, someone's going to call me on the phone, like, stop doing that. Someone shut down Notepad. There we go. So here's Notepad. Looks like it's got a thread in the wait state. I wonder why. I could go and grab a mini dump of the Notepad process if I knew how to use WinDBG. There's the D drive. Remember, I'm on the C drive, so that's information I'm learning about Azure here. I've got my working set information about this. That provides me value. There's information there I could use, and I didn't have to go and do that with a command line. So then you start thinking about automation. I can go and call that from a shell script or a grunt task. I can figure out, are the things that are running need to be running? Is this service running? Is that service running? Is that thing hung? Is this thing not hung? All without requiring remote access. I could even go and look at things like application settings, Git usernames, is web pages enabled. I can go and look at webhooks. Right now there are no webhooks, but you can set up webhooks in Azure such that, like, if you deploy to Git, Git will then call Azure and do the deployment, and then Azure can have a hook of its own where it'll like page you that a deployment's happened. So some of my websites that I really care about, like This Developer's Life. If you ever, anyone listen to This Developer's Life? No? One guy, thank you. This Developer's Life is a podcast that Rob Connery and I do, and I would encourage you to check it out. We just published a new episode of This Developer's Life this morning. Yay, one person cares, thank you. We did it on space. We actually talked to people who worked on the space shuttle, people who wrote the code that runs on the space shuttle and the Mars lander. And this is in GitHub. This code's in GitHub. So I updated it in GitHub. I pushed it into GitHub. GitHub then calls Azure. Azure then does a fetch, does a deploy, and then a webhook in Azure goes and calls Zapier. Zapier then pages me text message that that happened. So in case Rob Connery, my partner, wants to update the site, and I don't really want him updating the site, but he does, I get a page and I know what's going on. The point being that there's control. I know what's going on. I am in control. There are no black boxes. And as I said before, all of these things are in the Azure GitHub site, and we're hiding nothing from you. Isn't that cool? It's a kinder, gentler Microsoft, isn't it? It's kind of nice. Anyway, do check out This Developer's Life. It doesn't suck. It's really good. Oh, look at that. Notepad aborted due to no output and CPU activity for 60 seconds. I didn't know that. That is super interesting. You may increase, oh, I didn't know that either, command idle timeout setting to solve the issue. That is extremely helpful information. I did not know that. Isn't that cool? I like it when things happen. Things work out nicely for that. Yeah, that's kind of neat. Thank you. Thank you, Azure. Very kind. I can also go into Azure websites in Visual Studio, and we just added a feature now where you can actually attach a debugger to the Azure website by just right-clicking on it and saying Attach Debugger. So we'll do a remote attach to kind of IIS in the sky, and you can just start talking to it. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it's yummy. Okay. One of the other things is we're starting to put in more websites. If anyone has an Azure account, like you can go from the gallery. So just like the VM gallery, we've added some new ones, including, thanks to Jeremiah Billman and some other folks that worked hard on this, Ghost, the Ghost node.js blogging platform, fully in Node, runs entirely in Azure, and now if you want it, you don't even have to configure it. You just go next, and you can just enter in the Ghost things that you need to set up, and you'll have a blog running like that in Azure, and that's all Node. And then you could then turn on Visual Studio Online, right? And then keep that in sync with the stuff that the people at Node are working on, or hack on it in Node inside of Azure. But I like Visual Studio better. So have you guys seen that we now support Node in Visual Studio proper? Anyone hear about that? It's kind of a big news item, no? Anyone not hear about that? No? Hi, I'm just going to look at you then, because you didn't hear about that. Everyone else is like, yeah, come on, show me something we don't know. We read blogs. Yeah, just go, yes, that's really exciting. So here's like a blank Node application. And I can go and make this. And then I got Node up here. And the creepy part, and I say that seriously, it's really creepy. You can hit a breakpoint, right? And then go in here and pick a browser. And then hit F5. We'll fire up Node. Oh, it went too fast. There's Node. There's a browser that's paused. And there's a breakpoint. And then I can go in here and really see it. We're actually, this isn't Microsoft's JavaScript stuff, because that would be lame. We're using V8. So we're communicating with the V8 debugger and integrating it into Visual Studio. So you get all the Visual Studio experience, the watches and the autos and all that kind of stuff. And then use the exact same Azure Publish. So without leaving here, you could then go over and then right-click on this and say Publish, import an Azure Publish profile, and send it up. So there's like a half dozen different ways that you could do this. You could do it with Git, publish right from here, or whatever. So that's kind of hot. Let me talk a little bit about Visual Studio now. I'm going to change gears. Is that okay with you guys? Am I boring you? If you have to go, you can totally leave. It's not a problem. I will not feel bad. No? Okay, good. It's important to say that, because people are like, I really need to go, but Adam's like standing there. You should turn your head so that people can See, like 3 people left, and they needed you to turn away. I'm telling you, it's true. I'm just make a web app. It's true. And hit OK. This is be an MVC kind of base application. Have you been to Subway lately, Adam? I'm telling you, their post mix is just yummy. It's true. You should try it. In ASP.NET now, we've made a bunch of changes, and we've got a nice little help page that pops up to let you know what's going on. I'll show you a couple things that we've been doing in ASP.NET. You know, there's the runtime part of ASP.NET, and then there's the tooling part, and there's Scott Guthrie. I made this on my Surface. They told me I should promote Surface, so I wanted to show you the kind of powerful graphics that the Surface allows you to do. Have you seen Guthrie lately? He's looking rough. Really, really rough. The whole work on Azure thing's been taking a lot out of him. The web tools stuff of ASP.NET can be revved at a different speed. And if we do awesome stuff in the CSS editor, then the Node stuff gets it for free, and Django gets it for free. So everybody wins, right? So we've been doing a lot of that lately. And we've integrated ASP.NET into this kind of idea of one ASP.NET, and we're improving this even more so that you'll soon be able to go file a new project and have like Nancy effects or Service Stack or whatever other things you want. I want to make sure that everyone can compete on an open playing field. And we released 2012.2 early this year, and I want to make sure that if you're on 2012 and you're a web developer, ensure that you are at least on 2012.2 and preferably on .4 or whatever the latest version of 2012 is, because we've successfully pulled ASP.NET and Web Tools outside of Visual Studio. This is important because Visual Studio goes at one speed and the internet goes at another speed, you may have noticed. And you don't want to wait for a year or two in order to get new features and stuff like that. So we've pulled ASP.NET and Web Tools out, and we can rev now faster. Additionally, the core ASP.NET stuff that we want to change, we're doing largely in NuGet packages. It's very similar to Node, if there's any Node people, right? You don't want to wait for the next version of ASP.NET to get a bug fix in the minification library. So that's in a NuGet. It's very similar to Node packages. In 2013 and 2014, we're going to have another version, so we'll have .1, kind of the standard cadence of releases. We'll improve web tools, but we honestly don't know what we're going to be able to do fall of next year. I mean, like, it would be really presumptuous of Microsoft to say, and here's where the web is going, right? We'll let the web take us there, and that's kind of a philosophy that we've been doing in lots of ASP.NET stuff, is that people will come and say, well, why aren't you supporting Angular here or Ember there or Backbone there? Like, well, what if they lose? Right? I mean, I didn't want to pick like MochiKit and then jQuery wins or whatever. And it's presumptuous of Microsoft, I think, this is my opinion, to go file new prescriptive guidance. Here is how thou shalt make SPA single-page applications. Because ultimately, the internet is going to do something better. So instead, we're going to make great CSS editor, great project system that is extensible, great CSS, JavaScript, HTML5. And if Angular wins or Ember wins, I don't care. The open web will win, and we will support the open web. Does that make sense? So we're kind of thinking about our mid-2014 updates of Visual Studio to be more of some of the stuff that I'm showing you to support whatever does win. So if it's Angular or whatever, I don't know, but it's going to be awesome. Okay? After that, fall 2014, we don't have a plan that is that far because we're going to see what the web is doing. So we've code-named it a tiny Saddam Hussein taxi transformer boy. I really want to meet this kid because that is the greatest thing that I have ever seen in my entire life. I could watch that literally over and over, but okay. So Visual Studio goes at one speed, ASP.NET and Web Tools goes at another speed. The web is doing all sorts of things, and then we've got Mads Christensen's Web Essentials. Does anyone have Web Essentials? You have to. If you're doing web development, you have to be using Web Essentials because it changes everything. This is like Gmail Labs, right? It's the cool feature that you wish you had that hacks into the thing, and then if it's good and everyone uses it, we will promote it. So the first time we promoted a feature from Web Essentials was the less editor. We support less and SAST, and less is our kind of, we think less is winning, so less got promoted into Visual Studio proper, and there's a less editor. Web Essentials will light up things like CoffeeScript and TypeScript, split screen less. It'll light up the less editor. And it gets updated every couple of weeks, and it's totally open source. It's on GitHub. You can get involved. And cool things from this will then graduate. Because it's an extension and it's literally being made every couple of weeks, it could crash Visual Studio. But because it's an extension, you can just disable it. It does small stuff. If it doesn't work, you disable it and you wait for a week or two, and then you get the latest version. This allows us to do crazy stuff and crazy experiments like some of the stuff that I'm going to show you and go nuts. So let me show you a little bit of this stuff. I'll show you BrowserLink. Who's seen BrowserLink? Any BrowserLink fans? Okay, I'll show you a couple things, and you can then look smugly at the person to your right who did not know what that was and just say, yeah, yep, seen that demo already. Which is pretty cool. In Visual Studio, I can pull this down. I can pick different browsers. Like I can even pick an iPhone simulator from my buddies at Electric Plum. These guys are great. This is a nice custom build of Chromium that simulates an iPhone. It's very cool. I definitely encourage people to check that out. It is not simply Chrome in a shell. It is a totally custom build of Chromium that does a great job of being an iPhone on Windows. But I can pull this down. I can say browse with. Also, I can go to more emulators to find extra stuff. I can pick Firefox, Chrome, and IE, and what the heck, iPhone, and then set them all as the default at the same time. Because nothing bad could happen at a small screen resolution like this. And now multiple browsers are picked as my default. And then I'll hit F5. Yes, that is a great idea. You notice that we're using Twitter Bootstrap 3, or Bootstrap rather. That's our official out-of-the-box experience. And there's that. So let's see. You know, in the next version of Windows, they're going to let you resize Windows. It's going to be pretty exciting. You can even like overlay them. They could be overlapping, resizing windows. It's going to be really innovative. I'm pretty looking forward to it. Let's put this over here, and I don't know, I kind of like the whole full screen app thing. Not being able to resize things prevents me from having to do this kind of stuff. Okay, let's do that. Now I could go and do this. And by the way, if you know this person at work, don't be this person. You know this person? They're like they know the name of the file, but then they're basically thrashing to disk as they look for it. There's only one hotkey that you need to know, and it's Control comma, and then you type the file that you want, and then you hit enter, and then you go there. That is like the best thing. And I know that for some people, they're like the Emacs people. Are there any Emacs people here? Emacs people love to tell you that they're Emacs people. Or Vim. Any Vim people? Yeah, the Vim guy. Smug Vim. You're smug Vim guy now, right? Because here's the thing. You're better than I am, and I know that about myself, and that's okay. And Vim people want you to know that they're better because they are better people. And they can do stuff faster. They know chording and hotkeys, and then we'll show them cool tricks with and they'll say, no. Everyone knows that's Control K, Control C, F5, and then you type like this, and then it does something, right? And they'll tell you because they want you to know the good news. Have you heard the news about Vim? Give me 5 minutes. You switch to Dvorak and Vim, and in 6 short weeks, I'll have you back to typing normal speed. I've accepted in my soul that I want to be a Dvorak and Vim person, but I'm not, and I can't be. Do you use VS Vim at least? Do you know about VS Vim? Oh, dude. Yeah, so Vim ruined, yeah. So I'm going to ruin Vim for you. And when I show you some of the stuff you can do in VS, you're going to go back, you're going to get a copy of VS Vim, made by Vim fans, for Vim fans, and you'll be back. You'll be back. But for those of us who can't handle the psychic weight of Vim, Control comma and then typing something will get you darn near anything that you want. I can go and type something and notice that it'll look in not only names of files, but functions, CSS class names, privates, types, whatever, and it'll go right there. So Control comma changes your whole life. I encourage you to use it. So I go and I find this, and here we go. Here's ASP.NET, and you go and you type, Vim is the best. and you hit save, and then you go refresh, refresh, Control R if you're awesome, and then I don't know what that is, and then you figure out how to refresh this. I think it's reload, right? And that's fine. But if maybe you have auto reload or some of the different things like that, well, what we can do now is we're hosting SignalR WebSockets inside of Visual Studio proper, so I know that there are browsers connected already. And I'll just say Vim is okay. And I can then go and push that update out to all of those browsers that are running on all different machines. And that's cool. Right? That's kind of nice. It's a little showy demo, but you could see someone doing that. And there's a hotkey for it, Shift-Alt-Enter, I think, and you just hit the button and then it goes, yay, hotkeys. But what would be deeply cool and might get this gentleman off of Vim, we'll see. It's a challenge now, because now I have to convert you. I don't really want to convert you. I don't really care. But let's just say that I care. Let's say I get paid $1 for every person who switches off Vim. I could hit the Control button and then inject HTML into this thing where I could hit Inspect, and then it lights up inside of the DOM, and then as I hover around, it'll show me what line of code in my editor, even if it's in another page like layout. Right? And that's kind of cool. But that's not enough, though, because Vim people's fingers move so fast that he would search. That's actually him typing on the left there. You can't keep up with a Vim person. They're that good. They're like ninjas. If you ever see the annual ninja parade, there's actually one happening right now. They're ninjas, though. You can't see them. So I'm going to hit Control, and I'm going to hit Design, and then I'm going to click here, and I'm just going to start typing. Ah, what is happening? So then that finds that and then goes backwards. And that's okay, but what if I could put it into design mode, and what if the code wasn't actually HTML, it was actually part of something that was like a parameter of some, some C# there, right? C#. Notice how it's actually going into the action link on line 20. Does that make sense? So that's kind of cool. And that might make you go, okay, yeah, that's a cute parlor trick, but I'm still not going to your editor. But it does bring up the interesting philosophical point about design modes. Like some people are saying, like, why don't you improve the design mode inside of the designer of the ASP.NET Designer, right? Well, that would be lame because the ASP.NET Designer is written in C# and WPF, and it's not WYSIWYG. It's not even close. It doesn't even try to look like the web. And by the time we updated it for the next version of Visual Studio, Chrome 98 would have automatically updated, and we'd have to do it again. What better design mode than the browser itself? So this is all web standards, it's all WebSockets, and it works great everywhere, and it's open source, so you can knock yourself out. So what could we do that would be awesomer? More awesome-er. I could take our very lovely CSS editor, which people think very highly of. And you know that our CSS editor does things like this. Oh, I've been postponing this for almost a year. I've postponed it so often that they've actually grayed out the request exemption button. One day this is going to just start, and I'm not going to know. I don't want that. Here you go. See, if I hover over box sizing, it actually shows me what browsers I can use that on. That's an updated database of what browsers different things can show up on. And you see how it squiggled it. It's actually squiggling because I've got missing vendor specifics. So it's going to bring those in as well. And then I could go and add other vendor specifics, even though vendor specifics are bad. And I could say something like rotate -90 degrees. And see how all those guys are chilling with me? But then maybe like, oh, Opera just wants to be awesome, so they're going to do their own thing. So then we're going to go and do our own thing too, except eventually we'll bring Opera back into the fold like that. So that's kind of cool. But oftentimes you'll find yourself messing with the real stuff in the F12 tools. You'll get it exactly the way that you want it, and then you have to say don't move while you then try to get the DOM back the way that you want it. So what if I could go here and say F12 autosync, hit F12, and then go into the body, maybe, and then type like background color, and then say like red, or even like salmon, and then it's updating the editor automatically. So the DOM changes that I make here then get pushed back into the CSS. So then I can go over here and then hit refresh, and then everybody is green. Does that make sense? Is that cool? You guys are a tough crowd. I don't know what else to show you people. We're going to hopefully think about things like doing localhost NAT traversal, so that you can have, like Adobe has their Adobe Shadow, and you can have a whole series of devices that are on the desk. And there are other similar techniques for doing this kind of stuff. And I'm not trying to say, hey, Microsoft's the best, we're doing this first. What I'm saying is that the internet is moving in this direction. We've got awesome things coming from Adobe Brackets. We've got great things from WebStorm. We've got cool things happening in Sublime. Meteor is doing cool things. When we did this here, we're doing this as an extension to BrowserLink. BrowserLink is the technology that ships in 2013 that gives you the refresh. The F12 Auto Sync and the Design and the Inspect are also out today, but they're done as extensions, because sometimes, depending on what you're doing, they may not work, and we're going to need to keep updating that. But Visual Studio Web Essentials is open source. Mads Christensen and the community are working on that. You can see that at GitHub. You can get involved. If you can think of something else that we could potentially do that would go up in here and light up, the freeway, that highway that is BrowserLink, is open. And it's talking JavaScript and web standards, so that you could add this. So there's no reason that someone couldn't put in browser-specific stuff, or maybe BrowserLink for Sublime, or whatever. You can do this. We're also working on better editors for things like, let's see if I've got some CoffeeScript in here. Let's see if this works. This has been a little bit touch and go lately. So there's a CoffeeScript on the left. I've got split screen, so it's compiling automatically. On the right there, we get the same thing with less. And we'll do that browser link back to less, because we're going to put in source maps, so that if your source actually is not CSS, but rather a .less file, if I have any .less files sitting around, then we'll do a similar kind of thing, and we'll go and we'll find these things. You get the same light up. That's a less CSS. Actually, I want the less file, pardon me. There we go. So there's split screen less, and I get the color picker and the drop downs and all that stuff. And then we'll be able to go and push it all the way back into the less source, which is kind of cool. So we think we at the Microsoft ASP.NET and Web Tools team should be spending more time making what we believe is the best CSS editor there is, and get people to use that. And if they do Node or Django or whatever, that's fine. They're going to have fun with it. And that is better time spent than on what we think the new way that single-page applications should work. Because the internet's going to figure that out. Does that make sense? And we're going to support JSON and all the latest things that someone, and we'll have binary JSON soon, so that whatever that ultimate single-page application framework is, we'll be ready for it. Does that answer questions? Cool. Look at this. This is a slide that shows you, we actually, I don't know if we're allowed to show this, but check this out. What we did is we took the license.txt file that ships with Visual Studio and built a slide out of it. Martin Woodward did this. This is all the open source that ships in Visual Studio proper. And we figured it was okay to show because it's in the licensing files. Like, you have to ship those when you ship open source. So those are, all of the things that are in Visual Studio that are open source. So if you think that Microsoft has changed, I mean, like, if you don't think Microsoft has changed, that's kind of interesting proof. There's some even GPL stuff in there. Like, this is a funny story actually about libgit 2. We're shipping Git support inside of Visual Studio now, and it was so funny to watch all of the journalists. All the tech journalists were like, "Oh, big surprise! Microsoft shipping Git." We'd been committing to libgit 2 for like 18 months. If anyone bothers to read their check-in mail or look at the commits, they would have noticed this like a year in advance. But that's not what tech journalists do, right? But they should be doing that. Like, you can see what the master plan is at Microsoft. Look at the check-ins. Watch the commit logs. See what we're working on in GitHub, because it's happening. I just thought it was so funny when the Git support was a surprise. when we've been doing that. This is actually, we're one of the primary committers to this GPL project, and I think that's kind of cool.
All right, so thank you very much to Scott. This has been an awesome night. There's just a couple of things. We took a survey before we started, and we have a prize from Telerik. It's $1,500.
Is it in like cash?
No, not. It is it's the Telerik Dev Craft tool. So
Really? It's not like in these kind of cute dimes that you have here in Australia?
No. It's actually, our dollar's worth more than yours, Scotty.
That's $2. You know that?
All right. Okay.
I was throwing these away. That's $2 freaking.
So the question that people were asked to fill in was predict the percentage of Windows Phone 8 here tonight. I think it was $20, 20%. And there were a few guys that got it right, so you're going to have to just pick one so we get one winner, because I don't think Telerik are going to give us 5 of them.
That's very nice of them.
And then we head off to the pub for pizzas. So, can you just pick one? All right. And the winner?
Chris Anderson?
Oh, Chris, there you go. Merry Christmas. So it's been a long night. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the SSW guys that put this together. Thank you especially to Raj. I don't know if you know, but one of the SSW guys ran him over yesterday. He's, got a, smashed up foot, but he worked through pain. I couldn't believe it. Actually, it's quite funny. As no, it's not funny, but as the person ran him over, he was screaming like a girl, and he said...
That's not a very nice thing. Girls might have been like, yeah.
Right.
Kicked the car.
Go forward, because they just reversed over him. Go forward, it's sitting on him. And anyway,
You okay?
She goes over him a second time.
Is it broken? is it broken? Is your foot actually broken?
Yes.
Oh, so it's good. It's not really broken?
Yes.
Oh,
his bones are quite bendy.
You know what you should do? My Australian buddy said that you should get a teaspoon of cement. You know that stuff? Chopper? No, I can't say it because we're being recorded, but you take a teaspoon of cement and you harden up. That's what I heard. I'm just saying, that's what the Australians would do.
All right. So without any further ado, can we thank Scotty for a wonderful night?
I've been running SSW for 20 years. I've also been a lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney for many years, and I think the gap is getting wider between what they're being taught and what employers need for the guys to hit the ground running and be able to do real work.
Looking for a job as a junior developer can be really tough. There are so many applicants out there, and it's really hard for an employer to separate one from the other. They try really hard, but it's a challenge for them.
One of the problems when you come out of university is everything you learn at university isn't directly transferable into the enterprise.
I think I've seen all the problems that companies are having with new recruits. That's why we created Bootcamp.
The Bootcamp is a place where you'll go for 9 weeks, 40 to 60 hours a week, and do one thing and one thing only. That is learn to code in Microsoft technologies.
You're going to be learning MVC5, HTML5. These technologies are really important because the uptake in the industry is huge. So this course will just fill that gap between university and starting work.
At the bootcamp you have a mentor, and that mentor gets you over a challenge you may have straight away so you can go on to the next challenge. Instead of sitting there for hours searching Google and trying to find answers that sometimes you just can't find.
It's important to have a mentor because it stops you going off track. It stops you getting stuck on things that aren't really important. It happens time and time again where people are going through things that they found on the internet.
What they really need is experience and hands-on coding. And this bootcamp is going to give people the hands-on experience in coding for 9 weeks. Because if you can do as opposed to learn, you have your best chance at getting job ready for your first job in the industry.
It's not an easy course. For 9 weeks, you're thrown into the fire. You live and breathe .NET code. You live and breathe learning best practices and working as part of the team. You'll be working a minimum of 40 hours and mostly 60 hours a week, every week.
Becoming job ready is more than just learning how to write code. You need to know how to work in a team, you need to know how to gather requirements, you need to know how to use the tool set, the Microsoft stack of tools. And during the boot camp, we're going to be teaching you all these other aspects, the soft skills of development that, by yourself, learning from a book, learning through Google or videos, you just will never learn.
It's not just